Good day, mates and fellow adventurers. My name is Mordecai. Welcome back to this remote research facility from which I narrate various RPG horror stories for considerations for the table. A positive effect of the rise of social media is that it can make getting into a game with a bundle of similarly minded people for a great cohesive experience relatively easy. You can literally use Twitter to send out posts stating that you're looking for a game. It can make keeping in contact with your friends easier amongst other potential benefits. Not to mention that a lot of companies are on social media, so you can ratio them when they make a major mistake and have done a poor job of attempting to cover it up. However, on social media, you do sometimes get people who present themselves as being cool, like they want everyone to think of them as some sort of super giga chat who could beat Senator Armstrong at arm wrestling. So naturally they may be inclined to play as their ideal exquisite meme-fueled self-insert when they start playing a tabletop role-playing game with other people. And this does sometimes result in a game where everyone is having fun through this escapism. Sometimes. The reality is that you can also run into a GigaChad problem player who clashes in a jarring manner. Before we begin with the story, if you like my content and want to help support the channel, be sure to subscribe and maybe give the video a like. Every bit of support is highly appreciated and it's free to do. Thank you sincerely, and with that, we shall get on to reading the story. Let's delve into the often terrifying world of r/RPGHorrorStories. Today's narrative is titled Toxic Player Tries to Pick Fights with Everybody and Goes on Rants. He gets inevitably kicked from the group, and is written by user Red Hot Owl. I'll try to keep the summary of the setting and group dynamic brief, but there are some things that I have to clarify in order for the story to make sense. I apologise for any typos or grammatical errors. I'm writing this during a break. So, last weekend, my friend, the titular Loverboy XXX, if you happen to have read any of my previous stories, if not, don't worry about it, who is the GM, his group of players, and I were all in a game together. I very seldom participate in the actual campaigns, but I regularly help out creatively where I can. I guess you can consider me a sort of co-writer, and the one in charge of the general world building. When I do get to play, I mostly do so as a side character that's there to enhance the narrative for the rest of the party. For example, this time I was playing an elderly hermit, who was native to the newly discovered land the party of adventurers were tasked with exploring. The idea was for him to serve as both a plot hook and an introductory guide. The players were to escort my character back to his people's settlement, which was to then serve as their primary foothold in this unexplored land. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't stress that the subject of today's tale, by his own admission, isn't your typical TTRPG soy boy basement dweller like you or me. He is an alpha, a leader, a real man's man. And if his opinions offend you, well, too bad. Go back to Twitter or Tumblr and cry about it, loser. Being the pillar of masculine dominance that he is, I believe it appropriate to give him a suitable nickname. We will call him Sparkles. Sparkles joined the group a while back. The few times I've talked to him, he came across as a reserved but fairly well-adjusted guy. I have no idea what was compelling him to act the way he did during our most recent session, but if nothing else, at least I'll get some karma out of it. The first red flag appeared when my character showed the party to a small clearing where they could recuperate before having to brave the dangerous and untamed wilds once more. Out of nowhere, Sparkles' warrior, who had been relatively quiet up until now, for whatever reason, decided to confront my hermit, saying that his Uber Marco character follows no man, and he will be the one to lead us forth. and if I had a problem with that, I should have done something about it. This sudden shift in personality came completely out of left field. I don't know if he was trying to show off in front of somebody, or genuinely got off on bullying a crippled old man, knowing that I'd lose if it came down to player versus player action, but my character wasn't completely helpless. Although he certainly was no match for either of the remaining party members. The priest jumped in and tried to defuse the situation. He questioned the warrior as to why he was suddenly acting so hostile, in response to which he just grunted and stated that he'll play along, for now. Whatever that meant. I figured, fair enough. Nothing wrong with a bit of internal conflict to keep things interesting, even if it came across as kind of forced and unwarranted. Problem was, it just kept getting worse. He was becoming more and more confrontational for literally no reason, much to the rest of the party's discomfort, such as the time we happened upon a quaint village of capybara folk that were vaguely described by the GM as a pacifistic and tolerant society. Sparkles laughed when he heard this and walked up to the village's mayor, threatening him and demanding that they be given provisions, which the mayor had already offered. He then began to lecture this helpless NPC and the rest of us by proxy on how peace was a lie and only the strong survive in this dog-eat-dog world. A speech that might have been more effective had, you know, somebody actually bothered challenging his worldview. If you insist on being a sheep, then I am going to be the big bad wolf that eats you. I am paraphrasing, but you get the idea. The party had to once again try and talk him down, which Sparkles interpreted as them taking his side, as in the GM's. You see, according to Sparkles, the GM had apparently created this race as some sort of political commentary to try and push a progressive agenda onto him. A perfectly reasonable conclusion, I think we can all agree. The breaking point came when we finally reached my character's settlement. It turns out that he was the former chieftain who had exiled himself after failing to protect his family against a band of sea raiders. Though he had grown weak and feeble, perhaps the adventurers could succeed where he had failed, and rid his people of the oppressors that now occupied their ancestral shores. This, of course, was presented as completely optional. The party could have taken their payment and went off to do their own thing. Their reward included a map of the area, and thus they no longer needed my PC to guide them. This wasn't enough for Sparkles, however. This new revelation only seemed to justify the weird rage mindset he had towards my hermit. I fully understood it if he kept in character, but his animosity began to extend to me as a player as well. He suddenly went on a random tangent about how much he despises weak beta male characters, and how he should have just killed him then and there. I basically shrugged and said that he was free to attack me if he insisted, which only seemed to peeve him off even more. I guess he expected for me to get into a debate with him or something, I don't know. Our argument eventually devolved to him bragging about how often he embarrassed other male players of the hobby, and how the last guy that looked at him wrong is currently in a wheelchair. The way he was going, I was half expecting him to start claiming that he was an ex-marine with 100 confirmed kills under his belt. Sparkles then accused the GM of trying to censor him, while calling the rest of us snowflakes for just wanting to get back to playing the actual game, apparently. Fortunately, that's about as bad as it got. He was kicked from the server shortly thereafter. Now, I can't help but end this on an admittedly somewhat petty note. You see, Sparkles had seemingly forgotten that he had added a few of us on social media. I'd normally refrain from judging someone based on their looks, but let's just say that he isn't exactly the peak of traditional masculinity he'd like you to believe he is. Maybe the dude is struggling with his own insecurities, so I don't want to judge him too harshly, but that doesn't excuse him taking it out on the rest of us. In summary, an over-aggressive player insists on picking random fights and accuses the GM of forcing some sort of agenda onto him. He gets peeved when the rest of the party doesn't agree with his choice, goes on a politically charged rant, and gets booted. And that's where the story ends. I think regardless of what kind of table he was playing at, Sparkles would have eventually created problems. The whole alpha-beta mentality that he operated on created a rather jarring environment for all of the other players. And at no point did he attempt to actually consider how he was acting towards his fellow players and their characters in the game. It's as though he saw his character's alpha male peak of masculinity as the be-all and end-all goal for his actual person. Talk about inability to separate his character from himself. But rather this is more like he has created a character which he wants to emulate in reality without putting in any actual effort. And on top of that, the character is an insufferable embarrassment to men everywhere. That whole rant about being an alpha gigachad and spiting the quote weak betas unquote is definitely something that is somewhat expected from an edgelord who doesn't know any better. Maybe that's why Sparkles feels insecure. He may not have learned how to actually handle social interaction. He may never have been taught or given a chance to learn how to meaningfully play a tabletop role-playing game. It sadly does mean that I do have to dock some points from the poster of the story because they were rather petty, and there doesn't seem to be any actual attempts at talking with Sparkles about the problems they were causing. So now we have to do that as part of the analysis. If the only claim to fame that your character has is being a perceived stereotype that you want others to see them as, then you have a stereotype and not a character, which makes it much harder for that character to meaningfully interact with other characters in a game where cooperation is key to the success of the party. You can still have your allegedly alpha character, but like any video game that's in an alpha state of development, the character has to be able to develop. Besides, I am pretty sure that we all know that labeling a character as an alpha, beta, sigma, gamma, etc. is just plain cringe. Sure, we all can look at Senator Armstrong and make endless memes about him, but Senator Armstrong is a character. His actions have actual meaningful purpose behind them. He doesn't randomly pick fights to prove he's the best, nor does he go on long tangential rants about seemingly nothing. Plus, some of his lines are just fantastic and punchy without waffling, and they are delivered in a manner that elevates him to being one of the most memorable meme-esque characters of all time, whilst also retaining what makes him a character.
Don't with this, Senator!
My advice for Sparkles is this. Remember why it is important to keep the character separate from the player, and try to figure out a character for the table which is an actual character. Maybe, if you're feeling experimental, go for a spellcaster who sometimes drops their spellbook whilst in combat, but is someone that can talk to everyone and makes an effort to try being a team player. You might be surprised at how much of a difference that might make. Also, please drop the mentality about bedroom stuffs. You'll only alienate your fellow players with that. That's everything I have to say about this story. I mean, besides the fact that I broke character a few times during the reading, because it was, admittedly, a funny story in a lot of places. Thank you for watching the video. If you like my content and want to see more or wish to support the channel, please hit the subscribe button and maybe leave the video a like. It's free to do, and every bit of support is highly appreciated. Again, thank you for watching, and I shall see you all next time.